the Associate Executive Director for Policy and Advocacy at AASA, the School Superintendents Association, and I'll be serving as your host and moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'll take a few minutes to handle some general housekeeping matters. The first housekeeping item is to ensure that everyone is connected to the audio. You can access the audio by listening through your computer speakers or by dialing in on your phone. If you have not yet connected to the audio, the toll-free access number, is displayed on the screen for your convenience. The second housekeeping note is about the phone lines. To ensure that each participant has a quality experience, all phone lines, with the exception of the phone lines of the presenters, are muted and will remain muted throughout the duration of the webinar. The third housekeeping item is the instructions for participating in the Q&A segment. We have allotted time for questions at the end of the presentation. All questions will be fielded using the chat feature. Please take the time now to locate the chat box on the far right of your screen. If you do not see the chat box, click on the chat tab at the top right and it should appear. We ask that you please send your questions to all panelists, which is the option you should select in the drop-down menu. Type in your message in the chat box and then press send. Please post your questions in real time as they arise, and we will answer them during the Q&A segment. The final housekeeping item is that we are recording today's session. We want to allow as many school districts as possible the ability to take advantage of this webinar. The recording will be posted on the AASA website where it can be downloaded and viewed on demand. That's it for today's general housekeeping matters. At this point, I'm very excited to introduce today's presenters. Suzanne McHenry, the Senior Manager for PricewaterhouseCoopers Responsible Business Leadership Team. Melissa Klein-Dintz, the Associate Director of Research for the National Association of College Admission Counseling. Catalina Cifuentes, the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness for Riverside County's Office of Education. Sandy Baum, non-resident fellow in the Education Policy Program at the Urban Institute and Professor Emerita of Economics at Skidmore College, and Laura Kane, Chief Policy Officer at Aspire. I'm now happy to turn the webinar platform, over to Suzanne, Catalina, Sandy, and Laura.
Great. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suzanne McHenry, and I'm a Senior Manager at PwC, or PricewaterhouseCoopers, and work in our corporate responsibility practice. I'm here with you today just to give you a little background on our work supporting youth education, specifically on the research we funded and work closely on with the National Association for College Admission Counseling, or NACAC, which discuss students' barriers to financing a college education. So to start, you'll see this first slide talks about our youth education commitment called Access Your Potential, which is our commitment to equip students with the tech, money, and career skills they need to be successful in their future. So you'll see on this slide that we have some lofty goals to reach about 10 million students, train 100,000 educators and counselors, and mentor 10,000 students through volunteering our time in our local communities and collaborating with strategic partners such as NACAC. So now I'll move on to the next slide and talk a bit more about our research. So the objective of our study was to understand the needs and challenges that students, counselors, and admission professionals face with financing college, and to provide a document for the business community and the community at large to understand how we can help support these stakeholders in this process. So this is obviously important to PwC, as financial literacy is really the backbone of understanding how to finance college and necessary for students to understand prior to going through that process. So we'll move on to the next slide, actually, and talk about the 5 barriers that we identified through this research. So our results identified these 5 barriers across the stakeholder groups with suggested action points that we published in a one-pager, which you'll see as a resource link after the webcast, and you'll be able to get access to that. So the barriers on this slide are the first one. Low-income and first-generation students lack critical knowledge about college costs and financial aid opportunities. So a study had found that 82% of high school juniors overestimated tuition at public 4-year colleges in state, and that 44% were unaware of the FAFSA. So this is showing a significant gap in understanding either the net price of the college education and really how it can be funded, with a more significant gap existing with low-income and first-generation students who don't have the network or resources to help bridge that gap in understanding. So the second one was access to college counseling professionals is constrained, especially for students who need the most support. So this group likely knows these statistics, but public school counselors have an average caseload of 482 students, with many counselors in low-income areas consumed with behavior issues or other administrative duties, which is leaving them less time to discuss college counseling. The third one being school counseling and college admission professionals aren't adequately trained in college financing. Our next presenter, Melissa, will speak a little bit more about this, but many of our high school and college admission counselors that we spoke to aren't provided with training on financial aid, and they're left to figure it out mainly on the job or from other financial aid experts. So the fourth one that we found was that students struggle to understand the full implications of college financing options. So college, I'm sure as all of you know too, college award letters aren't standard and use unfamiliar terms that many students find it very difficult to compare them. So on top of the fact that many students don't understand the difference between a grant and a student loan or a work study, or how to differentiate between them on an award letter, this makes it much more difficult for them to really understand holistically how much they're paying for college. And then finally, our fifth barrier was students don't know where to go for support when they're making these final decisions about college and financial aid. So many students go through the hot potato process, where they're receiving some information from their secondary school counselor, a bit more from an admission counselor, and then other information from financial aid. For many students unfamiliar with this process or going it alone, it can be enough to decide not to go to college altogether. So as I mentioned, we have a great one-pager that sort of discusses a lot of these action points, and the idea was really to find some of these barriers and try to give a couple of opportunities on how the business community and the community at large can help support that. But I also want to pass it over to my dear friend, Melissa, who's going to talk a little bit more about our research and give a little bit more detail on the background that we did. So, Melissa?
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. As Suzanne mentioned, my role in today's webinar is to present some of the research findings that we did in conjunction and with collaboration from PwC. So we can move to the next slide. And first, before I get into survey results, I just wanted to share some information that may or may not be familiar to you and really form the foundation of where we started our research from. And that foundation is really knowing from a variety of academic studies and our own work that secondary school counselors can have a powerful impact on students' college-going behavior, everything from their perceptions to how college is affordable, whether they complete the FAFSA to apply for financial aid, and whether they ultimately enroll. And the research literature also tells us that those effects are even greater for low-income students. Next slide. And the other point I wanted to make, just to get a little more specific about the research, is that in addition to those general findings that I shared, the research tells us that individualized counseling is what has the most powerful effect. A recent study that NACAC commissioned of 2009 ninth graders showed that juniors who had talked one-on-one with a school counselor were nearly 7 times more likely to complete the FAFSA, 3 times more likely to attend college, and 2 times more likely, twice as likely to attend a bachelor's degree program. So we think those findings are pretty powerful, and wanted to share them with you before we move in to the research findings. Next slide. And Suzanne mentioned a bit of this, but I just wanted to set the stage as I walk you through the survey research findings of the questions that we were trying to answer. Because in case you're not familiar, NACAC is a professional membership association for college counseling on the secondary side and also for college admission officers in universities. That's the members that we serve. And so we're very interested to learn more about the current state of knowledge and preparation of counselors in advising students about financial aid. We did some focus groups so that we could hear more directly and, gather some qualitative information about their experience with students. And we were very interested to learn more about any training that they might receive and what those any gaps in the needs for that. And so I will now move into the survey findings on the next slide. The first findings I'm going to present are at the school level is really the unit of analysis, and then I'll move on to findings about individual counselors. One thing we wanted to know is when formal college planning services begin in schools, and you may find this information helpful even in seeing where your districts and schools that you work with fall in this figure. But our concern when we look at these data is that ideally we would want to see college planning starting by at least ninth grade. And it's encouraging that I think about 40% or so either start at ninth grade or earlier, but you can see the, there are comparable numbers on the other side that don't start until 11th grade, which is late in the game, particularly for students making choices, making curricular choices, setting themselves up to apply to college, and we would hope to see that starting earlier. And on the next slide, we asked, in addition to formal college planning, which involves things other than financial aid, like curriculum and selecting a college list and actually applying and testing and all those things, we wanted to know specifically, because of the nature of this study, is when schools start sharing information about paying for college. And you can see the numbers are even more stark in terms of the percent of schools, more than half, that don't start sharing this information until 11th grade, which again is quite late. Particularly, it's nice that it starts in 11th grade in terms of being able to apply for financial aid and understanding the FAFSA, but it's late in terms of students and families being able to plan leading up to college and think about that expense more in advance. Okay, and on the next slide, I'm going to move into the findings. Sorry, I have one more slide about the school level. So another thing we wanted to find out is what types of services or activities schools are providing to help their students with financial aid and understanding how to pay for college. And you can see by these numbers, it's a percentage of schools that offer these various things, mostly related to the FAFSA and completing other financial aid applications and understanding where they can get aid, that these numbers are quite high and encouraging that so many schools, a majority, have these services. What we also heard, though, and we have some additional data on our website, so you can see these numbers more specifically if you're interested. But in general, what we found is that the number of students who actually take advantage of these activities is much lower, and that's a challenge that we encountered when we heard from counselors in the focus groups is even encouraging students to participate. Okay, now on the next slide, I will move in to issues related specifically to secondary school counselors. One thing, of course, because of our role with professional development is that we wanted to understand whether counselors are getting training related to financial aid, because as Suzanne mentioned, this is often or very rarely part of the training and education they would receive on their way to becoming a school counselor. And we found that it was less than a third of schools had provided training related to financial aid counseling. So that's quite low. Though we did find that for those who offer training, most of them do cover all the costs for the counselors. And I just included a quote from the focus group so that you can see what we were hearing from our counselors, is that they really want to be able to help students with these issues, but sometimes they just don't even know what they don't know because they haven't received this type of training. Okay, and then I just wanted to share a few slides to show you why this training is important from the student perspective. We ask counselors two sets of questions. We ask them, and what you're seeing on the first slide is the first question. We ask them to self-report their level of knowledge on various financial aid topics, everything from what we would consider more basic, the FAFSA application process, to more advanced or complex issues like loan repayment options and differences between types of loans and those type of things. And you can see the percentages that you see are the percent of counselors who told us they're well-versed in this topic. And of course, it should come as no surprise that the counselors who received training reported having more knowledge. But I wanted to highlight the last column, which shows the percentage point difference, just to give you an idea of the magnitude of that effect of counseling. You can see that, for example, the difference between federal loans and private loans, it's a 16 percentage point difference when training's provided and not provided. And we think that's an important topic because of the dangers associated with private loans and the preferable terms with federal loans. And the other set of questions that we asked on the next slide, you'll see those answers, is we wanted to get an idea. So we have the topic knowledge, how difficult it is for counselors to ask questions that they may get from students and families, and particularly related to borrowing, because we have heard anecdotally and in other survey research that we've done that advice about borrowing is one of the more difficult things that counselors face. And again, you can see the knowledge levels here, or the percent who find the question somewhat or very hard to answer, are relatively high, particularly for some of the topics of related to how much I can borrow and which type of loan. And then again, you see the magnitude of those differences when training is provided. Okay. And on the next slide, I just wanted to reiterate a bit what Suzanne had referenced about the trick or the difficult transition over the summer. Another thing that we found in our literature review, which has been well documented, is that summer melt rates can be as high as 20 to 25% for certain groups of students, and that's among students who've already applied, been admitted, deposited to enroll, and don't show up on campus in the fall. And we think a lot of that has to do with just not knowing where to go for help in that final stage. So a lot of school counselors don't have summer hours. Their schools don't have resources and funding for that. And they may not be able the only contact they might have at the college is the admission counselor, who then may refer them to financial aid, and there are just a lot of cracks that students could fall through if they're not knowledgeable. And then on the final slide, I listed some of the recommendations that we came out with from our study, but I'm not going to read those to you word for word. I'll let you do that. But what I did want to mention before I pass things along is that NACAC does have a range of resources on its website that might be helpful to you. I don't want to take time to go through them individually, but if you go to our NACAC website and you look under Knowledge Center and Financing College, you'll see the variety of resources that we have related to financial aid that may be helpful to you and your counselors and students. And now I'll pass it along to our next presenter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catalina Cifuentes, and I am the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness in Riverside, California. And my presentation is going to just give you a little bit of boots on the ground. I work with 23 school districts in Riverside County. There's a little bit of background data about where we're located and the barriers we're facing in our county. Like I said earlier, I'm boots on the ground working with school districts, over 32,000 seniors alone, and we work with over 700 secondary counselors. So a very large county. As you can see from our data, over 63% of our students probably qualify for financial aid, probably qualified to get funding to pay for a college, but they just did not know how and where to begin. So our next slide shows the journey where we started, and I guess builds the why. This is a Lumina Foundation slide that talks about 25 of the most metropolitan regions in the U.S. and what is a degree attainment for these regions. And this was a slide we really look at a lot and reflect on why the need is so great when working with our students in our county. I wanted to include it because I think no matter where you are in the nation, you have to understand what's the condition. Why don't students have this help? First generation, what does that mean? So for us, this was our eye-opening moment where only 27% of the adults living in our communities, these are our parents, have a four-year degree. And this actually came from research from the Lumina Foundation. This became our power slide. This told us that chances are 7 out of the 10 of the students we're working with are not going to receive the information at home or the support. So the typical, let me give a student a handout with the FAFSA website in the school counseling office was not going to work with our students if we really wanted to make impact for their college enrollment and degree attainment. So our next slide kind of showcases what we decided to do. What we've built is a system where it's not just on the school counselor's responsibility, but it is school-wide, district-wide, county-wide focus around financial aid and the importance of FAFSA completion. So we launched what we called Race to Submit in 2014. It was our challenge to help those 32,000 plus students get support during the school day for FAFSA completion. Now, we continue to do the night workshops, the weekend workshops, but, when you have a senior class, one of our high schools has 1,000 seniors, we get maybe 50 to 100 people in one night. So we knew we had to embed it in the school day because based on that research, our students are institution dependent. So like some of you on this call, your students are not going to get it at home. How do we use this to embed this during the school day, during the curriculum? So we look to places to embed into the curriculum like government and economics teachers. How do we align FAFSA completion to their standards and metrics? We look for different departments where we're focused on with the special education department on their understanding for financial aid so they can own the special education students as well as our English learners. So it's a divide and conquer approach in sharing the wealth of this information so it's not just the 5 school counselors in the office. Now we're going to continue to advocate because those slides that you just heard earlier are so powerful. The number one best thing we can do for our kids is getting those caseloads down so our school counselors can have those one-on-one meetings, but we can't sit here and wait until we can do that. What do we do in the meantime? And that's build a system of collaboration with all stakeholders. So what we do in our next slide kind of shows you our race is a challenge. We challenge all of our high schools, charter schools in our county for a completion initiative. We didn't have necessarily additional funding. We did receive a Gates Award to focus on our post-secondary increase in enrollment as a county. So FAFSA completion was one of those pieces. But to start this challenge, we did not receive, it wasn't a separate fund or grant. We launched an initiative. We want to do a competition amongst all 100-plus high schools in the county who can get the highest FAFSA completion. And along the way, we offered support and training. We train over 700 school counselors, college and career center coordinators, school registrars, administrators, and even teachers. Anyone that comes that works with students and can directly impact and help students during the school day, after school, anytime, we train them and give them that support about FAFSA completion and understanding it. So there's multiple adults within the school and the district understanding what FAFSA completion is. And what we do is we award winners, and you can see one of our winners with a banner. This is a $25 banner, but our superintendents rally. Everybody wants to have one of their schools win this banner. And it's just really built a system of it's going to take all of us to move the indicators with these students. So on the next slide, you'll see what some of the things we do to share out. How do you scale out to 31,000 students or to over 100 high schools? And so we're very intentional with our work. We look at an improvement science type model where we take our best practices. So we have schools. Currently, we have 2 high schools in our county that have the highest FAFSA completion rate in the state of California. So they're number 1 for large schools. We call it level 7, and number 2 for medium-sized schools, anywhere from 5 to 600 graduates. So we take their best practices and we map them out on the FAFSA process map. And I'm going to give you a link so you can log in and create and download some of these documents, and feel free to use them. Part of me wanting to join this webinar is not to have you reinvent the wheel. Take what we've created and share it and utilize it. But we process map step by step. How do you get maximum FAFSA completion at the site level and engage all stakeholders? The next slide will show you some of the results, what's happened since we started. And we have a scorecard where we track this FAFSA completion. We also have a California DREAM Act where we do have financial aid, state financial aid for our dreamers. We track this completion on a weekly basis. So you can kind of see the trend data and see where your school's at. So our school counselors, our administrators, our principals are going to the website constantly to say, okay, where are we at this week? And we really work on coaching them on how to get their data and analyze their data down to the student level. So what's been the result of this on the next slide is we've gone from when we first started this journey, when we saw the Lumina Foundation slide, when we heard about we realized our students it was going to take us. They're institution dependent. We've gone from 15,150 completed applications, not just submitted, to 22,105. So we are up to about 73% completion now for the entire county. Now we have tons of work still left to do. We have a lot of work. One of the focus areas I would say, learn from me, I didn't focus on this earlier, was alternative education students, continuation high school students. What are we doing for those schools? Because the perception is, well, they're not going to college. If you talk about a traditional high school not getting enough resources and training, look at your alternative ed schools. And those are part of the numbers of where we're at struggling, is how do we get those schools engaged. Now, our next slide shows you what, as a result of this work in our county, it took note by the state of California. And so our state financial aid system, California Student Aid Commission, adopted this Race to Submit model as a statewide model. So it was launched just this October 1st, 2017, and so now every high school in California is competing against each other as a state initiative. And so we're excited and we're proud and we're honored that this is a focus. In California, about 65 to 66% of our students are on free and reduced lunch, yet our FAFSA rate is about 55 to 56%. So we have a lot of work in California to meet the needs of students and making sure they get the access and they get the help they need. So on the next slide, as working, of course, we want to change systems. We want to institute policy. So we were really excited to help push an actual assembly bill signed in 2015 by our Governor Brown to require that schools now embed FAFSA information and FAFSA completion in the 11th grade prior to the 12th grade. Now we want to get like Louisiana, so if there's anyone from Louisiana on the call, we're following your lead in making it a graduation requirement in California. But this is just an example. You don't have to wait for something like that to happen. You can grassroots, boots on the ground, create a program with this focus. Now, our next slide will show you the byproducts. So we've chosen in Riverside County. We're not going to focus on the negatives. We're not going to focus on just suspension rates or just expulsion rates. We're going to focus on rigor and high expectations for students. And so FAFSA completion, number of college applications submitted, all of those indicators that you can read more and get more information on the NACAC website on how to do. We're focusing on those, and you can see the byproducts of this. One of the byproducts I'm sharing is our graduation rate. Our county, serving 11 of the largest counties in California, we've taken the largest graduation rate increase over the last 5 to 6 years. We are now second in the state for graduation rates. Now, if you know California, you know the huge difference in demographics between Riverside County and Orange County, which is Newport Beach, Huntington Beach. And we are now second in the state. And we're saying we didn't focus just on graduation. We focused on the rigor of high expectations, on, yes, you can do your FAFSA. Some of the amazing research you're going to hear from Sandy Baum, one of the amazing research she has done is around middle school students. If you talk about financial aid and literacy in middle school, how it changes our academic outlook. And we've used that to embed programs in our middle schools. And we've watched, we didn't talk about why do you have to be S. We talked about, you know, you have potential to go to college. Let's talk about how we can pay for it. And yet it's never too early. So on our next slide, let me go ahead. Just a little bit more data as a superintendent, you'd want to know what are some of the byproducts? Why chase FAFSA? Other than Louisiana, I haven't found anyone using at the state level using a FAFSA completion indicator as an accountability metric yet, but you're going to get byproducts from focusing. So here's a slide of one of our districts. This is a slide from National Student Clearinghouse tracker data that shows the increase when we started Race to Submit in 2014, the increase in the actual college enrollment and enrollment in the fall immediately after high school to help. This really helped with our summer melt piece. And so you can see these increases, significant increases. Now, Moreno Valley Unified is a very large school district, so we're talking 1%, it could be about 100, 150 students. It's a huge impact it's making. And the next slide, you'll see Valverde Unified, their college going rate. And like I said, this is National Student Clearinghouse tracking data. If you are not on Student Tracker Clearinghouse, I suggest you do. It's the one place you can actually track completion and verified completion and enrollment, not self-reported information from students or a student survey, but actual verified did they attend. Now, Valverde Unified, you can see those huge gains. And one thing they just did, and they're the first district in our county in the state to do this, is they made grad FAFSA and completion or California Dream Act completion a graduation requirement. So you can see they're following that Louisiana model. We really want to address and get rid of the equity piece. The access is the first step. Do we even have access to this? And where's the equity now, how we're delivering it to our students? So we're very proud of this school district, and we're moving towards as a county to get all of our 19 high school districts on board. Our next slide is just, I'm going to wait, the link for the websites if you want to read more about what we're doing in Riverside County. So www.rcec.us. For the sake of time, I couldn't include more data slides, but I can show you as a county our suspensions and expulsions have decreased, and our community has changed as a result. We now have, for large counties served, we have the lowest juvenile felony arrest rate, so students between ages of 10 to 17, than any other county in California. So a lot of superintendents will ask, why FAFSA completion? It's not a graduation rate. It's not on my accountability index. But the byproducts from pushing financial literacy and supporting students to reach higher, you will get those gains in those other areas. And I can definitely provide my email address and share some of that additional data that's the day-to-day you live in and work in. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to our next presenter.
Thank you. This is Sandy Baum. I'm an economist at the Urban Institute, and I have been thinking for many, many years about paying for college, financial aid, college affordability. And so I'm going to ask you now to just take a step back from the important issue of FAFSA completion and think about how students pay for college and what college affordability really means. At the Urban Institute, we created a website, collegeaffordability.urban.org, with support from the Lumina Foundation to really try to help people understand what it means for college to be affordable, because we're worried about how much focus there is just on how much money do I have in my pocket today and what's the price tag that I hear about on a college education. And while, of course, it's very important, how are you going to pay the bills today, it is much more complicated than that. And it's also a much broader question than that. So basically, we want people to partly think earlier about how they're going to pay for college, but that whether or not college is affordable depends on resources that you have before college, during college, and after college. And that whether something is affordable or not is not just about whether it's cheap, because if something doesn't have value, then it's not affordable even if it's cheap. So going to the cheapest place is not necessarily the best thing to do. So the idea of this website is to give people information and data, but also to change the way people think about this question. And I will tell you that we are now updating the data on the website, so you should go to the website now, but come back soon after we have updated it. So what I wanted to do was give you some examples of some of the issues that we address on the website and how we do that to help people try to think about college affordability. So on the next slide, one of the things that we do is we take students from different income groups, from lower income students, lower middle, and upper income students, and then talk about how they pay for college at different types of institutions. So the example on the slide that you see is lower middle income students who are dependent, so students who are under the age of 24, their parents are in the picture, and are attending public four-year institutions. Now, these are averages. It doesn't describe every student, but the bar on the right takes the student budget, and the pink part is tuition and fees, and the black part is the budget beyond tuition and fees. This is really important because a lot of conversation is about just tuition prices. When people talk a lot these days about college should be free, they're talking about tuition and fees, and if that's the only thing that you think about, then a lot of people end up in real trouble because they don't really have the resources to cover their other expenses. So eating is not a cost of going to college because you have to eat whether you're in college or not, but you do have to come up with the funds to pay for your food and your housing, and if you're not working full-time, which is very difficult to do while you're in college full-time, then you probably are going to have trouble earning enough money to cover that. The bar on the left shows you all the resources that people put together to pay all these bills. And the bottom gray section is the expected family contribution, what students and parents are sort of expected to be able to come up with based on the FAFSA. And then there are blue segments that are grant aid from different sources, yellow segments that represent loans from different sources, and that light gray area at the top, that's something that's not filled by the loans or the grants or the expected family contribution, and students have to come up with it through their earnings or through other resources. So that is a challenge that students face. So you can see in this example that we see how students are paying their tuition and fees, but figuring out how much they can work and how they can piece together the money to fill the entire budget is sometimes challenging. And so you can see on the website examples of this for all different kinds of institutions and students with different incomes. The next slide is about the savings rate. And this is there because this is something that people don't think about very often. People think people are having more and more trouble paying for college because the price tag has gotten higher and higher, and that is certainly true. And, of course, because incomes are stagnant and because of increasing inequality. But it's also important to think about savings. Not every family is in a position to save for college. Obviously, if you're having trouble putting food on the table, it's not clear you should be trying to save, put aside money. But many families can save a little bit. And the savings rate in the United States has plummeted over time. It's gone up a little bit in recent years. That's a good thing. But what this graph indicates is that people just aren't saving very much money. And saving is obviously a very good way to contribute to what you can pay for college. It doesn't make any sense at all as parents to think, for 4 years, I'm going to spend money on college, but I'm not going to take anything out of my consumption before college. Of course, if you took something out every year before college, you wouldn't have such a struggle while your kids are in college. So thinking about the savings rate is very important in terms of thinking about college affordability. The next slide has to do with paying after college. And this is something that people don't really think about. I know people worry tremendously about student debt, and some students certainly borrow too much money and struggle. But borrowing for college in a moderate way is a very reasonable thing to do, because one of the things that really makes college affordable is that it does increase your earnings. And so if you think about it, if you borrow some money and then you pay the loans back out of your earnings premium, those are earnings that you would not have had you not gone to college. So that's what makes college affordable. Even if you have no money to start with, that doesn't mean college isn't affordable. It means that you need to think about, will I earn enough so that I can both live at a higher standard of living and pay for college? And on average, that is totally true for most students. They earn enough to pay back their loans. The people really having trouble are the people who drop out of college, and that's a whole other issue that really deserves a lot of attention. But one of the reasons that people don't understand this is because there is, in fact, as this graph shows you, a lot of variation in earnings across people with the same level of education. So you frequently see on the front page of the paper some bachelor's degree recipient who's working at Starbucks. And then people say, see, college doesn't pay off. But if you look at the bar for bachelor's degree recipients here, what you see is that there are bachelor's degree recipients making all kinds of different earnings, but far more bachelor's degree recipients than people on higher bars, people who don't have bachelor's degrees, make $80,000 or more a year when they're between the ages of 35 and 44. So we have to understand that there is a lot of variation in earnings, and finding a high school graduate who makes more than some college graduate does not prove that college doesn't pay off. In fact, it's very rare to make high salaries without a college degree and very rare to make low salaries with one. And so understanding this variation is really important, and we have information like this on the website. The next slide is about seeing how it's worth it and how college is affordable, because even after you take time out of the workforce and after you pay for college, you can make that up, and then for the rest of your life, your cumulative earnings will be higher than they would otherwise have been. So what this shows you, the gray line is a high school graduate who, at the age of 18, starts to work full-time at the average earnings for high school graduates. And then the black line is if instead you went to college, and we're giving you 5 years to get your bachelor's degree, and then earn the average earnings for bachelor's degree recipients. The yellow line is associate degree recipients. We gave you 3 years of full-time enrollment. And what you see is that the lines quickly in your early 30s cross over, and for the rest of your life, even taking into account having paid for college, you're making significantly more money than people who didn't go to college. So this, again, is about college affordability, but it's about college affordability not just in terms of how much money do I have in my pocket today, but how much money will I have in my pocket for the rest of my life. So the next slide is sort of a summary of some of the key issues that we hope that people will think about. And basically, affordability of college does not just depend on how much money you have in your pocket today. It depends on the value of the education and its payoff, not just its price. So if you go to a really crummy college, but it's cheap, and then you don't graduate or your degree doesn't pay off, it wasn't affordable. If you spend a little bit more, get a better education, and then have high earnings for the rest of your life, that becomes affordable. And your resources before, during, and after college all matter for affordability. So we should think about student debt and student debt problems, but we should think about borrowing for college as one way that we actually can make college more affordable and increase attainment. So we hope that, I think there's one more slide, we hope that people will go to this website, people will go to the Urban Institute website, collegeaffordability.urban.org, and it's meant for policymakers, for journalists, for people helping students plan for college, for students and families to understand more about college affordability. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sandy. This is Laura Kane from You Aspire, and we can go to the next slide, please. Very quickly, You Aspire, in case you're not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit that's hyper-focused on college affordability as a way to make higher education more equitable. We specifically directly support low-income students to earn more degrees with less debt. As you can see in the circles, we directly serve students. We also train practitioners. In both of those impact models, we help navigate complex financial aid. And we now also have policy and systems change efforts to try to fix the systems that have barriers to students to be able to succeed. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to focus on the topic of award letters. So an award letter, in case those might not be familiar, they are provided by colleges to students once they are accepted. And an award letter informs the amount and type of financial aid available from that college for the upcoming year. So in our practice, we focus a lot on award letters with students, and over the years, we've collected over 50,000 award letters from doing one-on-one conversations with students. And in this regard, we also train practitioners and have helped them work with their students too. So we recently did a report partnering with a think tank named New America, and we looked at 11,000 letters from the class of 2016, those are high school graduates, and we focused on the aid they provided. We also did a qualitative review of the way that they communicated this aid to students. Next slide, please. So the reason why this matters and why you should care about it is that ultimately students rely on these letters. So more and more Americans aren't deciding where to attend the college on the moment they get an acceptance letter. It's actually about where can they afford to go. So these letters matter. Number two, there isn't any standardization. So it's a total hodgepodge of what these aid offers look like. And lastly, the final two bullets point out that what's at risk are students' financial long-term health, as well as whether they directly enroll in college and are able to persist to complete that degree, which Sandy mentioned, the biggest risk are for students who drop out in terms of default and delinquency. Next, thank you. So in terms of the quantitative analysis, really one slide here. The headline is that the gaps are real, and the gaps that students and families face persist regardless of the different affordability decisions that students make. So folks might say, oh, well, you can't afford college, stay at home, live off campus. Oh, you can't afford college, just go to your in-state college instead. Or the fourth column, if you can't afford college, well, then just go to an open enrollment school. And then lastly, if you're smart and you're able to get in, go to a selective college who gives you a lot of aid. And as you can see in this graph, the black part is where students are taking loans. So even after aid, which is the blue, the loans, which are the black, the gray show that students are still facing significant gaps after initial loans from the federal government in order to attend. This is a focus on undergraduate students specifically. For today on the call, I wanted to just focus on 4 of the key qualitative findings we found versus the quantitative, and we'll dive deep on these 4 right now. So first off, confusing jargon and terminology. So what we learned from looking at these letters is that there's complete inconsistency and even inaccuracy in the terms that are used on these award letters, and it leaves students and families scratching their heads. And again, we have sat with thousands of students year over year, and it's really the same decoding conversation we have to have with them and to help inform their decision. So number one, there's lots of lingo and acronyms littered throughout the letters. Something like SEOG. If you're a financial aid specialist, you know that that's a federal grant that can help students pay for college. If you're not, you really have no idea what SEOG might mean. We also found that there are different terms for the same things. So a very common thing to find in the aid offer is the federal direct unsubsidized loan. Of the 515 colleges that we looked at closely, 455 of them listed it using 136 different names. 24 of those did not include the word loan. You can see the example to the right. Another key finding we found is that the price tag is missing. There's significant omission of the complete cost. So 1/3 of the letters we looked at had no cost at all. So that means the aid offer might have listed grants, loans, or scholarships, but there's no comparison to say, how far does that get me to being able to afford college? It's like being given a coupon for $20 to buy something, but you don't know if it costs $100 or $25. So there's no way to assess the value of what that offer is. Another 1/3 of the offers included direct costs only, and that means the costs that are paid specifically to the college directly. And this is a valuable start. However, it puts at risk the student to know what they need to afford to finish the year of college, not just what they need to afford to start the year of school. If our goal is to help make sure students stay enrolled and complete, again, to the point of their long-term financial health, and to the equity issue to help students get a degree so they have choices in their career and in life, we need to pay attention to the full cost of college. And there's current research showing significant food and housing insecurity is something that's common among American students, and specifically community college students especially, which is where the majority of our students go to college. The last third of those aid letters that we looked at presented what we would call the true cost of attendance, which includes what is owed to the college as well as the ongoing expenses to complete 1 year of school successfully. A third finding that we wanted to share with you today is in the way that colleges communicate their aid offers, is that they fail to differentiate the types of aid. It's really vital that students and families understand what is gift aid or a grant and scholarship, money that doesn't need to be paid back, what are loans, money that needs to be paid back over time with interest, and what is an offering of a job or work, money that is earned over time and distributed over time to the students. So 7 out of 10 letters that we examined just lumped everything together. The example is there on your right. And if you take a moment to say, how's that being organized? You might be thinking, oh, it's alphabetical, which is exactly right. So organizing information alphabetically makes great sense for a database. It actually doesn't make great sense for students and families, and often for students who are borrowing for the first time, to help them understand the distinction of the type of offer they're getting. The fourth finding I want to emphasize with you today is that whenever students and families are looking at these letters to make their decisions, they're asking, what's it going to cost? And I'm here to tell you, after looking at thousands of them, that it's really hard to know. So 6 out of 10 of the award letters that we looked at are not doing the math to show students what they need to pay to attend that college. And then we dove in real closely to the 40% that did do the math, and it was wildly inconsistent in how they did the math. We found 23 different calculations showing what the student needs to owe. And as a result, it makes it impossible as a consumer in the marketplace to understand what it is that they need to pay. If you see net cost for one school as 0, per the example below, and net cost at another school as $24,000, unfortunately, it doesn't actually mean that that's really, truly the different costs. And we find that it can be misleading. If you look at the example below, you can see that where the vertical line is, those 2 items are actually loans, and those are over $40,000. And yet many students and families see that their net cost after all aid is 0. They think it means that college is paid for. These are the type of practices that we have concern about, and we want to empower students and families with the right information to make the best decisions they can for their investment in their education and their future. As a conclusion of our research, and before hopping into the focus of what districts can do very quickly before moving to questions, these are 7 policy recommendations that we've made as a result of this research that can be applied to institutions, to states, and or the federal government. And you'll see that they actually echo very closely with our findings. We think every institution should offer a written financial aid offer, whether delivered by paper letter or by electronic communication. We believe strongly there need to be standardized terms and student-friendly definitions that are accessible to build financial literacy and in order to be able to have comparisons made by students and families to make the best choice they can. We believe that the full cost with a breakdown of what is owed to the college and what is needed to succeed for the year needs to be included. And we believe that the aid types can be described in clear separate sections. Lastly, we think there should be next steps, and 5 and 6 are some minutia financial aid details about where and how certain aid elements need to be communicated so that it's not confusing to students and families about when the aid is available. So focusing really specifically and very quickly as the perspective of a district, how can you support your students around focusing on award letters? Number 1, FAFSA matters tremendously. We are very active, and I really commend Catalina sharing the great work that Riverside is doing. I do want to note that we see this as the start of financial aid, and communicating that to your students and your families is essential. It's the beginning of the financial aid process, not the end to submit your FAFSA. Focus on the award letter and not the acceptance letter is what we recommend. And the phrase we use is celebrate when you get accepted, decide after reviewing your financial aid offers. And this is something that we think is very vital to communicate and then encourage in your district. Next slide, please. I thought it might be helpful now that you're seeing some of the trends in what is being communicated to students about where we see students and families making mistakes. So just very quickly, number one is many folks skip reviewing the aid offers. They get excited about the acceptance letter and don't necessarily take a look and ask questions. Secondly, often because cost is missing, students and families can get very excited about a scholarship, but not realizing what the gap is that they still need to cover. Third, because again, costs aren't clearly communicated, many times folks budget for tuition and fees only. Fourth, it's very important that they distinguish and accept grants before loans, the money that doesn't need to be paid back. Given the nomenclature and the way aid is communicated, that actually isn't always as easy as it sounds. And lastly, next steps are often required for students to access the aid that is offered. We found that over half the letters we looked at did not include next steps, and it's a problem that occurs in the summer that students might not have realized they lost the aid that was offered because they didn't accept it or act accordingly to requirements. And I'll wrap up right now just saying that if you're considering initiating efforts at your district, specifically around award letter review, you should. Number one, again, moving beyond FAFSA is what is going to help your students successfully enroll in college and help them make a strong decision. And we really see direct correlation with this in reducing summer melt. Lastly, how can you do it? I thought a lot of the examples Catalina gave around FAFSA can apply to award letter review. Awareness campaigns, having a landing page with tools and information to share, having nights to help review award letters similar to FAFSA completion events. And lastly, incorporating it as a graduation requirement or as a senior project. And at that point, I'll just share the wrap up here and let the question and answers begin.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a really rich webinar, a lot of content to parse through. Hi all, this is Noelle with AASA again. We didn't receive a ton of questions during the presentation, which is pretty common when there's a lot of information being dropped. So if you do have any questions, I do want to remind you that you should submit them through the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your browser screen. Beyond that, I don't see any popping up, which I don't. This is where we conclude the webinar. So I do want to thank our hosts. I'm not going to do the formal wrap-up, though, just in case there are any questions that may come in. And this is sometimes where I'll turn it back to our presenters, Catalina, Laura, Melissa, Sandy, and Suzanne. When you speak to this type of content, when you've given it to audiences, what are some of the questions you get? Because I find that when I present, there are common questions, and so I'm wondering if any of those might apply here. So what are some of the top questions you get when you share this content?
This is Catalina, and I can say one of the common questions I get is how do we build, kind of what Laura was just saying, how do you build it within the school day? And I think that's the key, because I think a lot of what we've been doing over the years has been very, Band-Aid put together. How do you go back as a district leader and look to places to build it within the system of your school day? Because sometimes students have after-school obligations and they can't get to it. And that's kind of why the focus of, as the first step is getting that FAFSA done. The next step we're looking at is exactly the award letters, understanding it. What does it mean? We do have students that did melt this past summer. They did everything we asked them to do, and they did not show up. But I think going back to your administrative team, your cabinet, and how do we look at these things and embed it into the curriculum, embed it into, if we take time for a pep rally for homecoming, can we take time in a day of the school year to do this within the school day, school-wide, district-wide? So making that focus from the leadership, from your leadership on down. So I think the first start is coming from you is the recommendation, and that's a lot of the success we're having, is it's a call to action from the superintendent.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. We did have one question come in that I would like to share to the panelists. And the question is, why haven't the government and CSS had any success in moving colleges toward a standardized financial aid award letter?
Sure, this is Laura. I think I can hop on that. There is a lot of momentum right now on this issue, and at UAspire we're active, working both with different state governments and the federal government. In essence, there's strong concern that a lot of institutions use these letters to inform students about their college, and they want to keep them unique to their college. There are some concerns from an enrollment management perspective, which means that some institutions are afraid of putting the full cost out because they're afraid it might scare students off. There's also concern about if the government is the right entity. There are folks that are worried that government is a generalist organization, if you will, and that they shouldn't be giving specific recommendations to this level of detail. That said, there is really strong consensus that the current system is not working. It is not consumer friendly, and we regulate these issues in terms of food nutrition labels and car sales and other elements that we can also do better by what's happening within our college financing environment.
Okay, thank you. I did get another question, and it's a good reminder that while we at AASA do serve and support the nation's public school superintendents, we often make our webinars available to a broader audience, and this following question speaks to that. If there's one piece of advice that you would give to parents on the call, what is that?
Review your award letters and have your friends and family do it as well. Engage your counselor and your school on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Really good feedback. I have one more question. How did Riverside make FAFSA completion a graduation requirement?
Okay, so we, as a county, because we have 23 different school districts, 23 different superintendents and board members, we're not there yet as an entire county, but we do have one of our first districts that did make it a graduation requirement. And they took it through their school board. I think a lot of it, some of the slides, and whoever this person is, they can shoot me an email and I can send them not only the board policy, if there's anyone on this call that would like the actual board policy, and I can even connect you to the superintendent of that district that's willing to share with you their process. But when they showed all the add value, they're at what's called a Title I school district in California. So over 70% of their students qualified for financial aid. For their school board, it just made sense. And then when we showed, even before they made it a graduation requirement, they were already hitting 80% completion. They were showing all the byproducts: increased AP and advanced placement enrollment, increase in courses of rigor, fourth year math. All of these things that were coming from this financial aid push, which means pushing post-secondary college enrollment, all of that just kind of led to, well, if we push FAFSA, we tell the kids we believe they can do post-secondary degrees and credentials, they're going to stay engaged in school. Their attendance has improved. They revenued and improved attendance over $5 million because more kids are coming to school. And so it was tons of byproducts. So the school board saw that and they voted to make it a graduation requirement. But if you shoot me an email, I can definitely send that information over and connect you to the superintendent in Val Verde Unified who would love to walk you through his process.
Yeah. And if we have a moment, I just wanted to add something for the parent on the line. I would encourage you to reach out to your school counselor, have your student do the same, get on their radar, ask for help. If you don't have access to a counselor for whatever reason, you can go to our website, the National Association for College Admission Counseling, and in our Knowledge Center under Financing College, we have a list of trusted sources for financial aid information that we refer people to, because if you go wandering into the internet on your own, you'll stumble upon a lot of sites that might actually have commercial interest, and that's why we put that source together.
Thank you. Again, this concludes our question and answer segment. A big thank you to our presenters and content generators today. This was a great webinar with a lot of information that I know is important not only to the superintendents we serve, but the parents and community members across the nation. This was a super informative session, and I hope that everything you shared will be useful to the participants who were able to take the time to join us today. Just a few closing housekeeping items. A link to this webinar presentation will be available on the AASA website. Participants will also receive a recording of this webinar along with the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you again to everyone today for your time and participation. Have a great day, and this concludes today's webinar.